Hi, this is Chris Jones. I'm from Westwater Resources, and I'm here to talk to you a little bit about battery graphite. We've heard a lot about lithium and copper and cobalt as components of the lithium-ion battery, but remember that a lithium-ion battery is some 20 to 25% battery graphite. And why this matters, really graphite's a part of all types of batteries, including lead acid, like the battery in the car that you may or may not have driven this morning, alkaline power cells, like those that are in your smoke detectors and flashlights at home, and non-rechargeable lithium cells. But coated spherical graphite, CPSG for us, is a critical component in lithium-ion batteries. You might see a Tesla coming down the road, but I see 800 pounds of batteries and 200 pounds of graphite. And remember that the United States government has defined graphite as critical to the nation's security and prosperity. In presidential executive orders, and that's plural, ask the United States government agencies to act with alacrity. And just a note here as we go through the presentation, battery graphite must be qualified by suppliers, meaning that there's some added time required to prove the product performance attributes. There are an estimated 6.3 million tons of graphite resources identified in the United States. There are no reserves by the U.S. definition. There's about 2.4 million tons in Alaska and about 3.9 million tons in Alabama. But another metric to remember as we go through this presentation, the United States car market is about 17 million new cars per year. Presently, about 4% of new car sales are EVs. That's about 680,000 cars per year. That, by the way, has grown from a standing start to 2% in 2019 and 4% in 2020. And each EV uses 170 to 200 pounds of battery graphite, as we just said. Planned U.S. sourced production in the next few years is about 75,000 tons per year. That's enough to produce 375,000 cars per year, or approximately 2% of the present U.S. market. If our plan is to electrify our automotive fleet, we will be almost entirely dependent on non-U.S. sources without some new thinking. Note that we are already 100% dependent on outside sources. Battery market segments, they really come in about four parts. Transportation, that's electric cars and buses. We expect a 23% growth rate expected over the next 10 years, and that's predominantly lithium-ion batteries. And the qualification cycle for those materials are 3 to 5 years. Battery energy storage systems, think of those as large batteries that, for grid storage, for instance. We expect an 11% growth rate over these next 10 years. Qualification cycles, again, around 5 years. And this is the enabling technology for wind and solar power, so that solar farms can produce power when the sun doesn't shine, and wind farms can produce power when the wind does not blow. In consumer electronics, think of these as the phone you have in your hand or the laptop you're working on right now, or other small consumer-oriented electronic devices. It's a well-established value chain with about a 3% compounded annual growth rate. There's many sub-segments and players. Qualification cycles for these small batteries are in the 1 to 3 year time frame. And then the fourth battery market for graphite is defense, aerospace, medical devices, people like Medtronics or others that put pacemakers together, and other government and major contract-based businesses. Think of these as niche businesses, but certainly important if your dad or your mom has a pacemaker, you you certainly think that's an important piece of the device, having a battery in there. The global graphite market has plenty of supply chain challenges. The spheroid on the left, if you look at that in terms of how different markets are reacting to each other by size, that yellowish tan is how China manages and supplies this market and relies upon others. It is the predominant supply chain issue and asset for battery materials going forward, most importantly graphite. China is losing its dominant position to other regions due to increasing costs in China, but that still remains 80+% of the CSPG market for sure going forward from right now. Another graph on market and supply chain challenges. Export prices tend to oscillate in that, really in that for the high-grade material, $1,000 to $1,500 a metric ton for raw materials for graphite production, graphite concentrates, and then certainly a little bit more aggressive in the $8,000 to $10,000 range for CSPG as it's marketed on the global market. But you'll see later that we expect pricing for these materials to react to supply chain disruption, of course. And as we move forward in the growth of these markets, those supply chains become increasingly fragile. When you look at the spherical graphite cost curve, it looks pretty flat, but remember that at the higher end of the curve are the operations that use hydrofluoric acid and other truly aggressive chemicals to process their graphite. There are newer technologies that promise and have actually demonstrated that they are lower in cost and lighter in environmental footprint. We're going to talk about that in just a minute or two. We see natural graphite flakes. Now, there's a differentiation between graphite flake and other types of graphite. Flakes are electrically active. And amorphous and vein type deposits, quite a bit less so. They tend to go more towards industrial uses, lower value add, processing, and pricing. But for this particular presentation, we're really focusing on flake. I think the important piece of this particular graphic really shows in about 2026. Those dots, we call it necessary unplanned supply. Hey, what that really means is we need the supply, but nobody plans on making it right now. Not China, not Brazil, not anybody. And that will present a logistical problem for those people that are putting graphite into batteries, most certainly. And lithium ion, remember, 20 to 25%. Lead acid batteries are 2 to 3%, as are alkaline power cells. Think of the alkaline power cell market as being 10 billion units a year with a gram of graphite in every one of those batteries. So again, we see a supply disruption coming to us within the next 5 years. And in the mining, processing, and upgrading circles, that's here and now. Battery graphite's made through a multi-step process. After mining and concentrating to 95%, we need to upgrade the graphite from 95% carbon to 99.95%. We do that through a number of different technologies. One is the use of hydrofluoric acid, which has an unfortunately large environmental footprint. It is difficult to handle. It is an extremely aggressive acid, and it's becoming high cost. And without environmental sustainability and high cost, this particular process is problematic for the world going forward. Companies like ours have developed processes that have a far lighter environmental footprint and, fortunately, a lighter operating cost. So we can be cost competitive as an industry with the Chinese using these alternative processes like that one developed at Westwater. Once these flakes of graphite are purified, they are rolled up into little potato-shaped objects between 5 and 10 microns in diameter. Remember that human hair is about 18 microns in diameter, so these are pretty small. They're then coated with hard carbon and put into the batteries as the anode material. About 50% of the graphite input to that process is recovered as spheronized graphite. The rest of it is waste in other people's processes. The process we developed for upgrading graphite captures that material and uses it for other battery markets. Again, we spoke a little bit about this. Chinese battery graphite is typically produced using hydrofluoric acid. It's difficult to handle, and it is expensive and harmful to our environment. And again, it can't be said often enough, there are alternative technologies developed outside of China that have a lighter environmental footprint and lower cost. With that, I'd like to open it up for questions.